Hello folks, my name is George Myhall and welcome to the Office of Image Archaeology. If you're a returning visitor, well, welcome back, and if you're new to the channel, welcome. This is a channel dedicated to the entertainment, education, and American way of life we enjoyed before the history of visionists and anti-American movement began the onslaught to destroy everything American. Here I still believe that this is the greatest country on earth, and I do my best to preserve that heritage as the Founding Fathers envisioned the place that we called home. All of it, both the good and the bad. In this video, I'm going to share with you a photograph I purchased a few months ago. Had this been 5 years ago, I would have explored it completely within a day or so of its purchase. But these days, my priority is film, so everything else seems to go begging until I have the time for it. So I have just finished researching the image, spending a good part of 4 days going down one rabbit hole after another. I now have enough information to give a fairly good account of what has turned out to be a very historical image marking the first fantastic voyage made to the American West by a sitting president. The story begins in September of 1880 with President Rutherford B. Hayes and an entourage that would include First Lady Lucy Webb Hayes, General William T. Sherman, Secretary of War Alexander Ramsey, and 10 others. On that day, they began a history-making journey that would be fraught with danger and excitement as the group traveled west on a 71-day jaunt that would cover over 10,000 miles. The journey would have them transported by multiple trains, stagecoaches, wagons, boats, and steamships. I can only imagine what securing the president's safety under those conditions must have been like. At one point on the return trip in October of 1880, a group called the Cowboys, led by one Curly Bill Brocious, threatened to attack the train at the town of Wilcox in the Arizona Territory. There was even a point where the party would have to travel by United States Army ambulance for about 180 miles in New Mexico. You can read a lot more about this incident at TrueWestMagazine.com. It was a very risky decision made by brave President Hayes to make that journey in the first place. Traveling through the very heart of the Apache Nation, the President did something no other leader of no other nation would do as they made their way through the wild frontier of an uncivilized America in an effort to make the country whole again after the Civil War. Hayes was a president of firsts, including being the first sitting president to ever visit the West Coast. I realize that this is going to be a lot of information, but it is not often that I run into such a rare and important photograph such as this example. This image contains a number of notable movers and shakers from the mid to late 1800s, and my aim is to share just a little bit about each one of those folks. All of this information was found on the internet using 3 sources: Wikipedia, Berkeley Library Archive, and a magazine article from TrueWestMagazine.com. So let's just get into it. The front side of the photo has numbers corresponding to the names on the back side, so we'll start with what I believe was intended to be number 1 but was left unmarked. This fellow's name is Francis Griffith Newlands, and he was born August 28, 1848 and died December 24, 1917. He moved to San Francisco and practiced law from 1870 to 1888. Newlands moved to Nevada in 1888 and was elected to the House of Representatives, where he served from 1893 to 1903. Then in 1903 he was elected as the U.S. Senator in Nevada and held that office from 1903 to 1917. Married to Clara Sharon, he is the son-in-law of Senator William Tang Sharon and is associated with Charles Webb Howard, who also appears in this photograph. In the number 2 spot, our man was only identified as General Stoneman, who I soon discovered is actually General George Stoneman Jr., who was born August 8th of 1822 and died September 5th of 1894. Stoneman was a United States cavalry officer and politician who served as the 15th governor of California from 1883 to 1887. He and his wife settled in the San Gabriel Valley on a 400-acre estate called Los Robles, which is now a very well-known California historical landmark. General Stone was memorialized for his raids into North Carolina and Virginia during the last weeks of the Civil War by a 1969 song, "The Night They Drove Old Dixie Down," that was written by a member of a musical group called The Band. Virgil Kane is the name, and I served on the Danville train till Stoneman's cavalry came and tore up the tracks again. Later this song would be recorded by Joan Baez, where she replaced the word Stoneman's cavalry with "so much cavalry." She later claimed in a Rolling Stones article ignorance of the true lyrics, as she had never seen them. As a Democrat, he would serve as the 15th governor of California. He granted 260 pardons and commuted 146 prison sentences in the last few weeks of his term. Stoneman was a proponent of prison reform, believing prisoners could be rehabilitated through parole. The more things change, the more they stay the same. There are very few clues about numbers 3 and 4. The initials RPH and Mrs. what looks like HUN, and maybe possibly a B. I'm not really sure. I can't really read that well. I'm pretty good at reading cursive, but that's got me. At any rate, they look like they're together, so probably man and wife. And number 5, there's no help at all. There's nothing about number 5. Are you tired of clicking through the commercials? Watch commercial free on Patreon. The link is below this video in the description box. And now back to the show. Number 6 is Mrs. Eleanor Boyle Ewing Sherman. She was born October 4th of 1824 and she died November 28th, 1888, just 8 years after this photograph was taken. Mrs. Sherman was the mother of 8 children, 2 of which died during the war. She was known to have taken a deep interest in the Indian missions, being the principal organizer of the Catholic Indian Missionary Association. Ellen declared herself in favor of Abraham Lincoln in advance of the 1860 elections and had a fierce pro-Union sentiment. During the Civil War, in addition to her husband, 3 of her 4 living brothers became Union generals: Hugh Boyle Ewing, Thomas Ewing Jr., and Charles Ewing. In addition, she would work to protect her husband's military standing during the war, especially in a January 1862 meeting with Lincoln at the time when General Sherman's reputation was under a cloud due to newspaper charges of insanity. Our 7th face belongs to that of General William Tecumseh Sherman, born on February 8, 1820 and died February 14, 1891. The man was an American soldier, businessman, educator, and author. He served in the Union Army during the Civil War, and he succeeded Grant as the Union commander in the Western Theater. Sherman's accomplishments during the war were many, but most notably was the taking of Atlanta and Sherman's march to the sea, where he enforced a scorched earth policy, destroying military targets as well as industry, infrastructure, and civilian property in an effort to disrupt the Confederacy's economy and transportation network in a campaign of total war. One other item of note, a newspaper called the Cincinnati Commercial reported that General Sherman was insane. Although the rumor was said to be a lie, it was something that would follow him to the grave. Number 8 is General Alexander McDowell McCook, who was born on April 22, 1831 and died June 12, 1903. McCook was a career United States Army officer and a Union general who fought in the Civil War. Reading his history, I'm not sure if the man was inept or just unlucky, but at 3 different times he was given command of large numbers of troops that would play a part in several famously key battles. Each time his troops were devastated, with many of his men losing their lives. From 1875 to 1880 he served as aide-de-camp to General William T. Sherman, who was at the time the General-in-Chief of the United States Army, and that would explain his appearing in this photograph. Number 9 in this lineup of notable people is Lucy Webb Hayes, who was born August 28, 1831 and died June 25, 1889. Lucy Hayes was the First Lady to have a college degree. She would also promote social equality more than previous First Ladies and was an advocate for Black Americans both before and after the Civil War. Lucy invited the first Black American professional musician to appear at the White House. As courageous as her husband, Lucy became a regular visitor to one of Rutherford's army camps during the war, where she nursed the wounded, cheered the homesick, and comforted the dying. She also secured supplies from Northern civilians to better equip the Union soldiers. So that would bring us to number 10, President Rutherford Birchard Hayes, who was born October 4, 1822 and died January 17, 1893. He was an American soldier, Whig and later Republican politician, and later an attorney who served as the 19th President of the United States from 1877 to 1881. Hayes was one of 5 presidents who served in the Civil War, but he was the only one to be wounded in the war. He was wounded on 4 occasions and had 4 horses shot out from under him. In the post-war years, as a lawyer, he was a staunch abolitionist who defended refugee slaves during the antebellum years with a firm belief in equal treatment without regard to wealth, social standing, or race. I've always been a firmly believe in that little saying that the more things change, the more that they stay the same. and the following will bear that up. The election of 1876 was extremely controversial. The electoral votes from 4 states were contested, and a congressional commission had to be set up to resolve the dispute. The bipartisan commission granted the disputed electoral votes to Hayes, giving him the presidency by 1 vote. Because of the bitter controversy of Hayes' election, the Republicans were worried that the Democrat Party might try to derail his inauguration. He became the first president to be given the oath of office inside of the White House. This occurred in a secret ceremony in the Red Room. Later the same day, he took the oath publicly on the east portico of the Capitol. Next to President Trump, he is probably the second most controversial man to ever hold the office, for a lot of reasons, but both men had a common trait. They were both very courageous presidents that fought for all Americans, regardless of race, creed, or color. Number 11 is Senator Amasa Leland Stanford, who was born March 9, 1824, and died June 21, 1893. Stanford was an American industrialist and politician. He was a United States Senator from California in office from March 14, 1885 to June 21, 1893. He and his wife Jane were the founders of Stanford University, and president of first the Central Pacific Railroad and later the Southern Pacific Railroad. He is also considered widely as one of the great robber barons of the period. After many hours of research, I discovered quite by accident that the photograph we are looking at was taken at his Palo Alto residence at the time. I was able to match this photograph with the one on the Wikipedia page, of which most of my material here comes from, and it was produced by La Roche Studio of Seattle, Washington in 1888. I believe that because Stanford is identified as Senator Stanford, that the names written on the back of the photo were more likely put there sometime after 1885, as that was when he was first elected to the office. Number 12 is marked with the initials P.O. General Ramsey, who was born September 8, 1815, and died April 22, 1903. When I first began researching this fellow, I was thinking I was looking for Post Office General Ramsey. But as it turns out, Alexander Ramsey was appointed by President Hayes as the 34th United States Secretary of War from December 10, 1879 to March 5, 1881, and is seen here accompanying the President on his trip west. Maybe someone else can explain what the initials P.O. stand for. Alexander Ramsey was elected from Pennsylvania as a Whig to the United States House of Representatives and served in the 28th and 29th Congresses from March 4, 1843 to March 3, 1847. He served as the first territorial governor of Minnesota from June 1, 1849 to May 15, 1853. In 1855, he became the mayor of St. Paul, Minnesota. Ramsey was elected second governor of Minnesota after statehood and served from January 2, 1860 to July 10, 1863. In August 1862, war erupted in Minnesota after years of broken treaties, starvation on the reservations, and tension between the Dakota and settler colonists. After bands of Dakota attacked farms and towns in the southwestern parts of the state, Ramsey appointed Colonel Henry Sibley, commander of the U.S. forces, to fight the Dakota. On September 9th, Ramsey delivered a speech to the Minnesota legislature. He declared the Sioux Indians of Minnesota must be exterminated or driven forever beyond the borders of the state. At the war's end, more than 300 Dakota were tried and convicted of war crimes. On December 26, 38 of them were hanged at Mankato. In 1863, Congress passed laws removing the Dakota and Ho-Chunk, none of whom had fought in the war, from Minnesota. In 1863, Ramsey was elected as a Republican senator of Minnesota. He was re-elected in 1869 and held the office until March 3, 1875, serving in the 38th, 39th, 40th, 41st, 42nd, and 43rd Congresses. He supported the radical Republicans who called for vigorous prosecution of the Civil War and immediate freedom for all slaves, and disfavored allowing ex-Confederate officers to retake political positions of power in the southern United States. He also voted for the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. As far as number 13 goes, the author here is unsure who the woman being escorted by Senator Sharon is. It is marked as either Mrs. Ramsey or Mrs. McDowell. Number 14 is Senator William Tang Sharon, who was born January 9, 1821, and died November 13, 1885. He was elected as a Republican to the United States Senate from Nevada and served from March 4, 1875 to March 3, 1881. His daughter Clara married Francis G. Newlands, and if you recall, he's also the first person named on this on the back of this photo. He became a congressman and senator from Nevada. Sharon was also the father of Florence Emily Sharon, who married the British baronet and soldier Sir Thomas George Fermor Hesketh. His name also appears on the back of the photograph, but I could not find him anyplace in the lineup of faces. 15 is an absolute blank. It's just a number. There's no name. 16 is Mayor William Alvord. He was born January 3rd, 1833, and he died December 22nd, 1904, and was a San Francisco merchant, banker, and political leader. He was the 14th mayor of San Francisco from 1871 to 1873 and served as president of the Bank of California from 1878 until his death. Number 17 is Chaz, or Charles Webb Howard, who was born January 23, 1831, and died July 17, 1808. UC Berkeley Libraries at Berkeley, California has an archive titled Charles Webb Howard Letters from 1896 to 1905. At first I could find very little about this fellow other than what the Berkeley Library archive had, but as it turns out, again, he was another one of those people in the photograph that actually had a large part to play in California's history. I found the following information in a Wikipedia article within the Point Reyes wiki titled The Shafter Empire. Lords of Point Reyes for decades, the Shafter brothers, Oscar and James, and the son-in-law, Charles Webb Howard, established large-scale, high-quality dairies that became prime examples of cleanliness, organization, and success. This was a dairy empire begun about 1850 and would last until 1937, when the last of the Shafters' property was sold off. After reading about how they acquired the land from the Mexican ranchers at the time, I cannot help but wonder if this is where the term getting the shaft comes from. And of course, the last entry on the back of the photograph says, "On the steps, sir," and I really couldn't read what it actually says, but the last name was pretty plain, Hasketh. As I said, Sir Thomas George Fermor Hasketh, 7th Baronet. Although his name is on here, he doesn't appear to be in the photograph anyplace. This photograph is an excellent example of what the Office of Image Archaeology does. Just like an archaeologist of the outdoor variety, I do a lot of digging, but the closest I get to dirt is a little dust here and there. I hope you've enjoyed this and will share it with others. If you like it, please tap the like button and subscribe if you're so inclined. Peace, God bless, see you next time.